Hello and welcome. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine standing at the edge of history itself, watching two of the mightiest civilizations ever to grace the world of Oerth as they spiral toward mutual annihilation. You are about to witness the invoked devastation and the reign of colorless fire. Twin cataclysms so terrible that they reshaped continents, created deserts where fertile lands once thrived, and sent countless thousands fleeing across the world in desperate migrations that would define the very map you know today. This is not merely ancient history. This is the wound that never healed, the scar tissue upon which modern nations built their foundations, the nightmare that still haunts the collective memory of entire peoples thousands of years later. You find yourself in a time roughly 1,000 years before the common year calendar begins, in an era later scholars would date to approximately -485 by Dale reckoning. The continent of Oerth stretches vast and ancient beneath endless skies, and upon its western reaches, two empires stand as titans of civilization, culture, and magical might. To the northwest, the Baklunish Empire spreads across fertile plains and river valleys, its golden domes and minarets rising toward the heavens like prayers made manifest in stone and precious metals. To the south and southeast, the Suel Imperium commands territories of staggering scope, its cities built with architectural genius that makes them seem as though gods themselves placed each stone with divine precision. These are not primitive kingdoms squabbling over hunting grounds. These are sophisticated civilizations that have spent centuries, perhaps millennia, perfecting arts both mundane and mystical. The citizens of these empires do not merely survive. They thrive, creating works of art that would make later ages weep with envy, codifying laws that govern millions with relative peace, and pushing the boundaries of magical theory into realms that modern practitioners can scarcely comprehend. You stand in an age when magic flows through society like water through aqueducts, channeled, controlled, and utilized for purposes ranging from the lighting of street lamps to the reshaping of weather patterns across entire provinces. The world is older than most realize. The Sulis and Baklunish peoples did not spring fully formed from the earth. Their empires rose upon the ruins of earlier civilizations, incorporating knowledge salvaged from fallen kingdoms, whose very names have been lost to the consuming maw of time. Ancient artifacts, predating even the founding of these empires, dot the landscape, half-buried reminders that greatness is always temporary, that every zenith precedes a fall. But such philosophical musings concern the empires not at all. They are too busy being magnificent, too absorbed in their own brilliance to heed the warnings written in crumbling stone and weathered monuments. Let your awareness drift southward and behold the Suel Imperium in the full flower of its power. The Sulis people are distinctive, their features marking them as clearly as any banner. pale skin that rarely sees the burning touch of the sun, hair in shades of platinum, gold, and copper, eyes like chips of ice in every shade from palest blue to gray. They are proud, these Suelas, perhaps too proud, carrying themselves with the absolute certainty that they represent the pinnacle of human achievement. And in many ways, their accomplishments justify this confidence. The capital cities of the Suel Imperium demonstrate mastery over both material and mystical arts. Spires of white marble pierce the clouds, enchanted to maintain their pristine appearance despite the passage of centuries. Streets are laid out in mathematically perfect patterns, wide avenues accommodating traffic, both pedestrian and magical. Public fountains, each one a work of art, provide clean water drawn from distant mountain springs through aqueduct systems that demonstrate mastery of both engineering and hydromancy. The buildings are not merely functional, they are statements, declarations of permanence and power rendered in stone, glass, and precious metals. Magic permeates Suel society at every level. The children of noble houses receive training in the arcane arts as a matter of course, learning to read and manipulate the weave as naturally as you might learn to read and write. The merchant classes employ lesser magics to preserve goods, transport cargo, and communicate across vast distances. Even the lowest laborers benefit from magical innovations, tools that never dull, lights that never fail, heating systems that respond to thought rather than fuel. This is not a society where magic is rare and feared. This is a civilization that has integrated arcane power into its very foundations. The Suel social structure is rigid, stratified, unforgiving. At the apex sit the noble houses, ancient bloodlines that trace their ancestry back through countless generations, each maintaining meticulous records proving their purity. These houses compete viciously for influence, engaging in political machinations that span decades. Alliances shift like sand. Marriages are arranged like business contracts. And assassination, both mundane and magical, is simply another tool in the arsenal of ambitious nobles. Below the nobility exists a vast bureaucracy, administrators who keep the impossibly complex machinery of empire functioning smoothly. These are educated individuals, often minor practitioners of magic themselves, who handle the tedious but essential work of governance. They collect taxes, adjudicate disputes, maintain records, and ensure that imperial decrees reach even the most distant provinces. The military represents another major social pillar, professional soldiers who have elevated warfare to an art form, supported by specialized battle mages whose destructive capabilities can level fortifications or turn entire regiments into ash. Yet for all their achievements, the Suel Imperium carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. The same pride that drove them to greatness becomes hubris. The same magical prowess that built wonders develops weapons of terrifying power. the same social rigidity that maintained order for centuries becomes brittleness, an inability to adapt to changing circumstances. The Suelis look upon other peoples and see only primitives and barbarians, beings to be conquered, enslaved, or ignored. They believe themselves invincible, and that belief will prove their undoing. Now turn your attention northward and witness the Baklunish Empire, different in character, but equal in magnificence to its southern rival. The Baklunish people possess their own distinctive features, copper and bronze skin tones that speak of desert ancestry, hair in shades of black and brown, eyes dark as midnight or warm as amber. They dress in flowing garments suited to their climate, favoring rich colors and intricate patterns that reflect their deep appreciation for aesthetic beauty. The Baklunish cities rise from the landscape like jewels scattered by a generous god. Unlike the austere marble monuments of the Suel, Baklunish architecture embraces curves, domes, arches, and minarets. Buildings are decorated with intricate tilework, mosaics that tell stories in colored glass and ceramic, calligraphy that transforms written words into visual poetry. Gardens are central to Baklunish urban planning. Lush green spaces where fountains bubble and exotic flowers perfume the air, providing respite from the heat and dust of surrounding lands. Magic in the Baklunish Empire takes on different characteristics than its Suel counterpart. Where Suel's magic tends toward the systematic, theoretical, and academic, Baklunish mysticism embraces intuition, spirituality, and connection to deeper cosmic forces. Baklunish mages, often called mystics or enlightened ones, do not merely study magic as an academic discipline. They live it, breathe it, become one with the fundamental forces that shape reality. Their magic incorporates ritual, meditation, sacred geometry, and invocations of powers that exist beyond the material plane. The religious life of the Baklunish Empire is rich and complex. Numerous temples serve various deities, each faith contributing to the spiritual fabric of the empire. Unlike the Suel's tendency toward dogmatic state religion, the Baklunish embrace theological diversity, recognizing that the divine manifests in many forms, and that wisdom can be found along multiple paths. Holy men and women hold respected positions in society, their counsel sought by rulers and commoners alike. Monasteries dot the landscape, places where dedicated practitioners seek enlightenment through discipline, study, and mystical practice. Baklunish society, while hierarchical, possesses more fluidity than its Suel counterpart. Merchants can rise to positions of considerable influence through acumen and wealth. Scholars gain respect regardless of birth. Military heroes earn titles and lands through valor. The empire maintains elaborate codes of honor, but these codes emphasize duty, loyalty, and proper conduct rather than mere bloodline. A Baklunish noble might trace their lineage back generations, but they must also demonstrate worthiness through their own actions, lest they bring shame upon their ancestors. Trade forms the lifeblood of the Baklunish economy. Caravans traverse vast distances, carrying spices, silks, gems, and crafted goods to distant markets. The empire controls crucial trade routes, positioning itself as the intermediary between various regions, growing wealthy on tariffs and transaction fees. Baklunish merchants are legendary for their negotiating skills, their ability to strike deals that leave all parties satisfied, and their uncanny knack for identifying valuable opportunities. This commercial success funds the empire's cultural achievements, military expansion, and ambitious magical research. Yet the Baklunish, too, harbor dangerous flaws. Their confidence in their own superiority, while perhaps less overt than Suel arrogance, remains present. They view themselves as the most civilized people in the world, blessed by the gods, destined to bring enlightenment to lesser peoples. This attitude breeds resentment among neighbors and justifies aggressive expansionism that pushes the empire's borders ever outward, inevitably bringing them into conflict with the other great power of the region, the Suel Imperium. The seeds of conflict. You witness now the fundamental problem, the impossible situation that will ultimately doom both civilizations. Two empires, each magnificent in its own way, each convinced of its cultural and magical superiority, each expanding outward from its heartland, and each inevitably encroaching upon territories the other considers rightfully theirs. The borderlands between Suel's and Baklunish territories become contested zones, regions where influence ebbs and flows, where minor kingdoms and tribal confederations find themselves caught between two grinding millstones. The historical record suggests that for generations, perhaps even centuries, the relationship between the empires maintained an uneasy balance. Diplomatic missions exchanged gifts and pleasantries. Trade occurred, though carefully monitored and taxed. Scholars occasionally shared research, though always holding back their most precious discoveries. But beneath this veneer of civilized interaction, tension built steadily. Each empire eyed the other's territory with covetous desire. Each saw the other as an obstacle to destiny, a rival that must eventually be subordinated or eliminated. Minor conflicts erupted with increasing frequency. A border garrison attacks a caravan, claiming it violated imperial territory. A Baklunish noble's hunting party clashes with Suel soldiers, leaving dead on both sides. A disputed city changes hands 3 times in as many years, its population suffering under the competing occupations. These incidents might have been resolved through negotiation in earlier, less tense times. Now they become causes for outrage, provocations that demand response, grievances added to ever-lengthening lists of insults and injuries. The armies of both empires begin massing along disputed frontiers. Fortifications rise from the earth. Magical and mundane defenses transforming the borderlands into armed camps. Spies infiltrate enemy territory, gathering intelligence, sowing discord, occasionally attempting assassination or sabotage. The diplomatic language between the empires grows colder, messages laced with barely concealed threats. Moderates on both sides, those counseling patience and compromise, find their voices drowned out by hawks demanding decisive action. Magic escalates the tensions in ways mundane conflicts never could. Suel battle mages can devastate entire battalions with carefully crafted spells. Baklunish mystics can summon creatures from other planes to serve as living weapons. Both sides engage in magical arms races, each discovery prompting desperate efforts to develop countermeasures. Ancient texts are scoured for forbidden knowledge. Dangerous experiments push the boundaries of what magic can achieve. The mages of both empires become increasingly reckless, so focused on achieving advantage over their rivals that they ignore the warnings from their own colleagues about forces that should not be unleashed. You stand now at the precipice, watching as two great civilizations slide inexorably toward mutual annihilation. The world does not yet know what horrors await. The common people of both empires go about their daily lives, perhaps aware of distant troubles, but trusting their leaders to resolve matters without catastrophic war. They do not understand that decisions are being made in palace chambers and arcane laboratories. Decisions that will alter the face of the world itself, that will turn thriving lands into barren wastelands, that will kill millions and send millions more fleeing in terror. The stage is set. The actors have taken their positions. The tragedy is about to begin, and there is no power in all of Oerth that can prevent what is coming. The invoked devastation and the rain of colorless fire wait just beyond the horizon, gathering like storms about to break upon an unsuspecting world. Section 2. The Spiral Toward War. The conflicts did not begin with grand declarations or formal ceremonies. They began with raiders on both sides of the Sulhout Mountains, pillaging the territories opposite of them. Each incursion breeding resentment, each attack demanding response. You watch as tensions build toward the year 5031 by the Suelis dating calendar, the year that would later be known as -484 by Dale reckoning. When provocation finally exceeds tolerance and transforms border skirmishes into open warfare, the Suel Emperor, Adzal, makes the fateful decision that spring. The Baklunish raids have grown too frequent, too bold, too costly to ignore any longer. He dispatches 9,000 troops northward across the Hout Range, with orders to punish the northerners, to demonstrate that attacks upon Suel territories carry consequences too severe to contemplate. This is meant to be a punitive expedition, a sharp lesson that will restore order to the borderlands and remind the Baklunish of Suel military superiority. But the Baklunish are not cowed. Their Padishah, Ramif, sends his own forces to meet the Suel advance. The two armies converge upon a place that will become infamous in history: the Fields of Patter. What follows is carnage on a scale neither empire has witnessed in living memory. For 3 days, the armies clash in brutal combat, neither willing to yield, neither able to gain decisive advantage. Magic tears across the battlefield alongside steel. Earth erupts beneath charging cavalry. Fire consumes entire formations. The sky itself seems to burn with the fury of battle mages pushing their arts to extremes. When the battle finally ends, both armies lie all but annihilated upon the blood-soaked fields. Thousands of Suel soldiers will never return home. Thousands of Baklunish warriors lie dead or dying beneath foreign skies. The Fields of Patter become a monument to futility, a testament to what happens when pride and power collide without room for compromise. It is in one of the early battles during this period that the monk Suel, with 38 others, holds off a critical pass from an entire army of vengeful Suel, earning himself the sobriquet, the Survivor, and inspiring an entire generation of defenders. This is but the beginning. The Fields of Patter do not shock the empires into peace, but rather ignite a conflict that will consume the next 63 years. What started as a punitive expedition becomes total war, a struggle for dominance that neither side can afford to lose, but neither possesses the strength to decisively win. The borderlands transform into permanent battlegrounds, regions where armies clash season after season, year after year, until the very land becomes scarred by endless warfare. As the war grows more fierce and desperate, both sides seek any advantage that might tip the balance. The Suel, with their systematic approach to magical research, create 4 powerful artifacts infused with portions of powerful archomental spirits. These artifacts, bound to all Hydra and other elemental powers, are designed to turn the Baklunish affiliation with the elements against them. But the artifacts prove flawed, dangerous even to their creators. The Suel send them as gifts to foreign allies. The Chalice Everlasting, the Oerthly plates dispatched somewhere in the central Flannies, the Unquenchable Scepter sent to what is now Blackmoor, and the Tempest Horn delivered to an empire in western Oerth. The paranoia and desperation within the Suel Imperium grows to such extremes that their own wizard priests in service of Cyril create the Pseudoppelgangers, though whether as weapons against the Baklunish or for infiltration of their own government remains unclear. What becomes evident is that the Suel, in their desperation to defeat external enemies, become as great a threat to themselves as to anyone else. Internal rivalries intensify under the pressure of prolonged warfare. Noble houses using the chaos as cover to eliminate rivals. Political assassinations becoming commonplace. In the year 5050, by the Suel's calendar, -465 by Dale reckoning, both empires take a step that will have consequences far beyond their own territories. they begin employing orcs and associated humanoid races as mercenaries against one another. This decision, born of manpower shortages after decades of attrition, unleashes chaos across the region. The humanoid mercenaries, marauding and unprincipled, pillage wantonly, caring nothing for the causes they nominally serve. They attack settlements of both empires with equal enthusiasm, seeking plunder rather than victory. The humanoid incursions drive the Oerthian peoples, who occupy territories between and beyond the warring empires, eastward into the Flannies. You witness entire tribes uprooted, displaced by violence they played no part in creating, becoming refugees from a war not their own. The Oerth migration reaches its peak within 8 years. Hordes of Oerthians flooding into new territories, followed by waves of non-humans entering the Flannies in their wake. The demographic map of the entire region begins shifting, populations moving on scales not seen in recorded history. By the year 5069 of the Suel calendar, negative 446 Dale reckoning, even the confident Suel begin to doubt their inevitable victory. The war has raged for 38 years with no end in sight. The Baklunish prove far more resilient than anticipated, their mystical arts matching Suel sorcery, their determination unshaken by decades of conflict. Some Suel, seeing the trajectory of endless warfare, begin fleeing eastward, venturing across the Kendine Pass, also called the Harsh Pass, in the southern Crystal Mist Mountains, a range that will later be known as the Helfernisses. Among those who flee is Zelif, son of Emperor Adzal himself. The imperial heir abandons his birthright, accompanied by thousands of loyal citizens who share his assessment that the Imperium's future looks increasingly bleak. This is not mere cowardice, but pragmatic recognition of reality. Better to preserve Suel's culture in new lands than perish defending a civilization spiraling toward catastrophe. The Emperor, enraged by his son's desertion, diverts forces from the war to pursue him. These pursuers vanish into the mountains, never to be heard from again, their fate one of countless mysteries the war creates. The migrations continue throughout the following decades. Uncounted Suel commoners and numerous minor noble houses flee across the Harsh Pass into the Flannies, seeking to escape not only the war itself, but also the opportunism of rival houses who might use the conflict's chaos to eliminate them. Some noble houses, seeing enemies closing in, choose exile over assassination. The population of Suel's cities decreases noticeably as those with means or foresight depart for uncertain futures in eastern lands. Zelif and his followers claim the Tilvanot Peninsula, defeating or enslaving the local humanoid and Flan tribes they encounter there. This colony represents hope for Suel's continuity, a new beginning far from the dying Imperium. But even here, concern for cultural purity manifests in troubling ways. In the year 5090, one of the Sulis calendar, -424 Dale Reckoning, Keveli Mok founds the Scarlet Brotherhood in the last years of the Baklunish Sulis Wars. The Brotherhood's purpose is explicit: to combat what its members perceive as dilution of Suel virtues and superiority, to preserve and purify Sulis blood and behavior, with the ultimate goal of eventual Sulis dominion over other peoples. The Baklunish Empire, despite suffering enormous casualties and territorial losses, refuses to capitulate. Their mystics develop increasingly sophisticated defensive measures, countering Suel battle magic with techniques that confound imperial tactical doctrine. Illusions make 100 warriors appear as 1,000. Enchantments turn battalions against themselves. Rituals summon sandstorms that blind and choke advancing armies. The borderlands become proving grounds for magical innovations, driven by desperation and necessity. The countryside bears terrible scars from decades of warfare. Farmland that once fed millions lies trampled and burned, irrigation systems destroyed, farmers killed or displaced. Famine stalks both empires, malnutrition weakening populations already exhausted by prolonged conflict. Disease spreads through displaced peoples. Typhus, dysentery, plague. Refugee camps become death traps where disease kills as efficiently as any weapon. Children grow up knowing nothing but war, their childhood stolen by conflicts their grandparents began. The economic strain grows unbearable. Both empires deplete treasuries accumulated over centuries, spending in years what took generations to accumulate. Trade collapses as merchants avoid war zones. Infrastructure crumbles from neglect. Resources diverted entirely to military needs. Debt mounts as both sides borrow against futures that grow increasingly uncertain. Provincial governors begin withholding tax revenues, claiming local defense needs, weakening central authority when strong governance is most needed. The military and magical establishments gain influence that overshadows civilian authorities. Generals who achieve even minor victories become political powers. Their counsel sought on matters far beyond warfare. War councils meet in secret, their deliberations hidden from populations who might object to increasingly extreme measures being contemplated. The institutional checks that once balanced power erode as emergency measures become permanent features of governance. Within the magical communities of both empires, ethical constraints dissolve under pressure to provide advantages over enemies. Ancient texts, long sealed in restricted archives for good reason, are unsealed and studied. Grimoires containing knowledge deemed too dangerous for general use are distributed to military researchers. Rituals that bargain with entities from lower planes, spells that corrupt natural order, techniques drawing power from suffering and death. All these forbidden arts become merely tools in the arsenal. What was unthinkable becomes simply another option when survival seems to hang in balance. By the year 5094 of the Sulis calendar, negative 422 by Dale reckoning, both empires teeter on the edge of total collapse. 63 years of continuous warfare have bled them to the point where victory through conventional means appears impossible for either side. The Suel Imperium, despite its vaunted magical superiority and military prowess, cannot force Baklunish submission. The Baklunish Empire, for all its mystical skill and determined resistance, cannot expel Suel forces from contested territories. It is in this context of mutual exhaustion and desperation that the final, terrible decisions are made. The Suel mages of power, practitioners of magics unknown to the present day, gather their energies for a working of unprecedented scale. They have discovered or developed techniques that promise to end the war decisively, to eliminate the Baklunish threat permanently, to demonstrate Suel supremacy beyond any possible dispute. The specifics of their methods remain unclear to later historians, the details lost when the civilization that created them was destroyed. What is clear is that they prepare to invoke devastation beyond anything previously conceived. The Baklunish, though unaware of specific Suel plans, sense that something catastrophic approaches. Their own mystics gather at sacred sites, particularly at Taveg Baragu, the ancient stone circles that serve as focal points for their most powerful rituals. They too have access to forbidden knowledge, to techniques that should never be employed, to workings that violate cosmic order. They prepare their own desperate measures, though whether as attack or defense, even they may not be certain. The world stands upon the brink of transformation, though few yet comprehend what approaches. Decisions made in desperation and rage are about to reshape entire regions, to kill millions, to scar the world permanently. The conventional war, brutal as it has been, is about to give way to something far worse. The deployment of ultimate weapons by civilizations that have lost all restraint, all wisdom, all sense of limits that should never be crossed. The invoked devastation approaches, and after it, the reign of colorless fire. Two empires, each magnificent in their achievements, each terrible in their pride, are about to destroy each other so completely that future ages will struggle to believe they ever existed at all. Section 3. The Suel Decision for Ultimate Weapon. You find yourself within the innermost chambers of power in the Suel Imperium, though the specific location remains lost to history. Consumed in the very catastrophe these meetings will spawn, what survives in fragmentary records and oral traditions passed down through refugee descendants suggests that in the final year of the war, a council of the most powerful figures in the Imperium gathered to confront an unbearable truth. Conventional warfare, no matter how prolonged, would not achieve the decisive victory the Suel required to survive. The participants in these fateful deliberations included those who would later be known simply as the Suel Mages of Power, practitioners whose names and specific identities have been largely lost to time. What we know of them comes from scattered references in texts that survived the Empire's destruction. Fragments that hint at individuals who had achieved mastery over magical arts that modern practitioners can barely comprehend. These were not merely skilled wizards, but figures who had spent lifetimes, some extended beyond natural spans through arcane means, exploring the furthest reaches of magical possibility. The military situation they faced was dire beyond dispute. 63 years of continuous warfare had achieved nothing resembling victory. The Baklunish Empire, despite suffering enormous casualties and territorial losses, showed no signs of capitulation. Their mystics had proven remarkably adept at developing countermeasures to Suel battle magic, their forces adapting to imperial tactics with frustrating efficiency. Every Suel advance met determined resistance. Every territorial gain came at costs that could not be sustained indefinitely. The economic reports must have been equally troubling. The imperial treasury, once seemingly inexhaustible, approached depletion. Tax revenues had fallen dramatically as productive territories were devastated by warfare or depopulated by migration. The currency had been debased repeatedly to fund military operations, triggering inflation that eroded the wealth of all but the most powerful noble houses. Foreign creditors, sensing the Imperium's weakening position, demanded increasingly onerous terms for loans. Within a handful of years, the Empire would lack resources to maintain its military forces at the strength necessary to continue the war. Intelligence reports likely added another layer of concern. The Baklunish mystics, despite their losses, continued gathering at sacred sites, particularly at the ancient stone circles known as Taveg Baragu. The purpose of these gatherings remained unclear to Suel observers, but the concentration of mystical power they represented could not be ignored. If the Baklunish were developing their own extreme measures, if they too sought solutions beyond conventional warfare, then delay might prove as fatal as outright military defeat. In this context of desperation and dwindling options, someone proposed what must have seemed at first an unthinkable solution. Ancient texts existed, knowledge salvaged from civilizations that preceded both empires, fragments of lore describing workings of power on scales never attempted in recorded history. These texts, kept sealed in restricted archives precisely because they were deemed too dangerous for practical application, spoke of magic that could reshape entire regions, that could eliminate not merely armies, but entire populations and the lands that sustained them. The debate that followed must have been intense, though the specific arguments have not survived. We can infer from what happened that some voices counseled caution, warning that such extreme measures violated every principle of civilized conduct, that the moral stain of genocide would be permanent, that unleashing forces on such a scale carried risks that might extend beyond intended targets. The death toll from such a working would be incomprehensible. Millions of civilians who bore no direct responsibility for their government's actions, consumed alongside military forces. But other voices, likely the majority, must have argued from pragmatic necessity. The Baklunish Empire had proven implacable, unwilling to negotiate reasonably, determined to fight until one side achieved total dominance. Every month the war continued. Thousands more Suel citizens died. Resources that could build prosperity were consumed in mutual destruction. If an ultimate working could end the conflict decisively, if it could eliminate the Baklunish threat permanently, did simple calculation not favor its employment? Was it not more moral to end decades of grinding warfare through one terrible act, rather than allow attrition to continue until the Imperium itself collapsed? The decision, when finally reached, represented the triumph of desperation over wisdom, of short-term thinking over consideration of long-term consequences. Authorization was granted for the mages of power to proceed with preparation of what would become known as the Invoked Devastation. The working they envisioned, based on fragments preserved in later accounts, involved fundamental manipulation of reality itself, techniques that would tear the barriers between planes of existence, allowing energies from elemental realms to flood into the material world with catastrophic results. The preparation phase required months of intensive effort, though the specific timeline remains unclear from surviving records. Materials of extraordinary rarity had to be gathered, components so exotic that merely acquiring them required expeditions to distant lands and negotiations with entities best left undisturbed. Some accounts suggest involvement of powers from lower planes, bargains struck that would exact prices beyond mere material costs. Other fragmentary references hint at consultation with beings from elemental planes, attempts to channel their raw energies toward destructive purpose. The location chosen for the ritual, if indeed a specific site was necessary, has never been conclusively identified. Some scholars theorize it occurred near the Sulhout Mountains, close to Baklunish territories to maximize effect, while minimizing risk to Suel lands. Others suggest a more central location within the Imperium, a place of natural magical concentration where the boundaries between planes already wore thin. The truth, like so many details of this catastrophe, died with those who performed the working. The mages of power who would execute the ritual spent months in preparation, mastering techniques never before attempted, practicing coordination of magical energies on scales that dwarfed anything in their previous experience. This was not merely complex spellcasting, but fundamental alteration of cosmic law. manipulation of the forces that maintain separation between different planes of existence. A single error could prove as fatal to the ritualists as to their intended targets. And errors at this scale might extend consequences beyond any capacity to predict or control. As the preparation proceeded, security must have been paramount. If the Baklunish learned of what approached, they would certainly attempt disruption or launch preemptive strikes. The work had to proceed in absolute secrecy, known only to those directly involved and the highest levels of imperial leadership. Even within the Suel government, knowledge was likely compartmentalized, with most officials aware only that crucial magical research proceeded, but ignorant of its specific nature or intended application. We can imagine the psychological state of those who prepared this working. They were about to attempt something unprecedented, to unleash destruction on a scale that would dwarf every previous act of warfare combined. The moral weight of millions of anticipated deaths must have troubled even the most hardened among them, unless they had progressed so far into ruthless pragmatism that conscience no longer functioned. Did they rationalize their actions as necessary evil? Did they convince themselves that destroying the Baklunish Empire served some greater good? Or did they simply stop thinking about consequences beyond immediate military objectives? Some among the Suel magical establishment must have objected. Practitioners who understood that certain boundaries should never be crossed regardless of circumstances. But if such dissenting voices existed, they were either silenced through threat of treason charges, or simply ignored by leadership desperate for any solution that promised decisive victory. The momentum toward catastrophe, once established, proved impossible to halt. The Baklunish, though unaware of specific Suel preparations, were not entirely ignorant of growing danger. Their own mystics, sensitive to disturbances in magical currents, likely detected anomalies that suggested unprecedented workings being prepared. They would have intensified their own defensive measures, perhaps begun contemplating desperate responses should the Suel deploy some ultimate weapon. The stage was being set not merely for one cataclysm, but for two, action and reaction, both equally devastating. As the Suel ritual approached readiness, as components were gathered and techniques mastered and final preparations made, the world stood on the brink of transformation. The decisions made in chambers of power, the techniques developed in arcane laboratories, the materials assembled through months of effort, all these elements converged toward a moment that would reshape the map of Oerth, that would kill millions in instants, that would demonstrate both the awesome power and the terrible folly of mortal ambition, unconstrained by wisdom. The invoked devastation, once merely a concept discussed in desperate councils, had become an imminent reality. The Suel mages of power, whether from conviction or compulsion, or simple momentum of events beyond their control, prepared to unleash forces that would prove their mastery over magic. and simultaneously guarantee their civilization's destruction. For the Baklunish would not accept annihilation without response. And the response, when it came, would prove every bit as terrible as the initial attack. The final preparations were made. The moment approached, and the world, unknowing, continued its normal patterns for what would prove to be the last time before everything changed. Section 4. The Ritual of Devastation. What happened on that fateful day in the year 5094 of the Suel calendar, negative 422 by Dale reckoning, remains one of the great mysteries of Greyhawk history. The specific location where the Suel Mages of Power performed their working has never been conclusively identified. Consumed in the very catastrophe they unleashed or lost in the chaos that followed, the identities of most participants, save for scattered references that survived in refugee accounts, have been forgotten. The precise techniques they employed, the components they used, the invocations they spoke, all these details died with the civilization that created them. What we can piece together from fragmentary records and the accounts of distant observers suggests that the ritual occurred somewhere within or near the Suel Imperium's territories, a location chosen for reasons we can only speculate about. Perhaps it needed to be close to Baklunish lands to maximize destructive effect. Perhaps it required a place where the boundaries between planes of existence already wore thin, where reality's fabric could be more easily torn. Perhaps practical considerations, security and secrecy, dictated that the working take place deep within Imperial territory, where Baklunish spies could not interfere. The mages of power who performed the ritual numbered at least several, possibly as many as a dozen or more, based on later references to the Council of Mages. In texts that survived the Empire's fall, these were individuals who had achieved mastery over magical arts that modern practitioners struggle to comprehend. Wizards who had spent lifetimes exploring the furthest reaches of arcane possibility. Their names, with few exceptions, have been lost to history, though their collective title, the Mages of Power, suggests they held positions of extraordinary authority within the Suel magical hierarchy. The preparation for the working, based on what later scholars pieced together from refugee accounts, must have been extensive. Materials of great rarity would have been required. Components whose very nature we can only guess at from hints in fragmentary texts. Some accounts mention artifacts of ancient provenance, objects predating the Suel Imperium itself, tools crafted by civilizations whose names have been forgotten. Other references suggest bargains struck with entities from other planes, exchanges that would exact terrible prices beyond mere material costs. The ritual itself, when finally performed, involved manipulation of forces fundamental to reality's structure. The fragmentary accounts that survived speak of techniques that tore the barriers between planes of existence, that allowed energies from realms beyond the material world to flood through into Oerth with catastrophic results. Whether this involved specific elemental planes, or darker realms from the lower planes, or some combination of multiple extraplanar sources, remains a matter of scholarly debate with insufficient evidence for definitive conclusions. What is certain is that the working achieved effects beyond anything previously attempted in recorded history. The mages of power, through means we can only partially reconstruct, created what amounted to a fundamental breach in cosmic order, a wound in reality through which forces that should remain separated from the material world poured forth in devastating torrent. The scale of power involved staggers comprehension, representing not merely powerful magic, but manipulation of the underlying laws that govern existence itself. You stand as observer in those final moments before the unleashing, watching preparations, whose specific details remain frustratingly unclear from historical distance. The mages of power take positions according to patterns, whose significance we can only guess at. Perhaps arrangements dictated by astronomical considerations, or geometric configurations derived from ancient mathematical principles, or symbolic formations meant to channel cosmic energies. Their exact positions, like so many other details, have been lost to time. The incantations they speak, if indeed verbal components were required, remain unknown. No record survived of the specific words or phrases employed, the languages in which they were spoken, the order in which various invocations were delivered. We know only that at some point during the ritual, the mages of power achieved the critical threshold, the moment when accumulated energies reached the level necessary to tear reality itself, to create the breach through which devastation would pour forth. The moment of release, when it finally comes, defies adequate description. Later accounts from distant observers speak of the sky itself seeming to tear open, of colors appearing that have no names in human language, of sounds that hurt the mind to hear. The air, witnesses report, became thick and oppressive, charged with energies that made hair stand on end and set teeth to aching. Animals fled in panic, their instincts warning of wrongness on levels beyond human perception. What the mages of power experienced in that moment, standing at the epicenter of forces they had unleashed, can only be imagined. Did they feel triumph, believing they had achieved decisive victory over their enemies? Did they sense immediately that something had gone wrong, that the working exceeded their capacity to control? Did they understand, in those final instants, that they had doomed not merely their enemies, but ultimately their own civilization as well? The energies they unleashed began spreading outward, not following predictable physical trajectories, but expanding according to rules derived from planar geometries beyond normal comprehension. The devastation moved with terrible speed, far faster than any messenger could ride to warn of its approach. It swept northward toward Baklunish territories, carrying destruction on a scale that would transform entire regions from thriving lands into permanent wastelands. The breach in reality, once created, proved far more difficult to close than the mages of power had anticipated. If indeed they had planned any mechanism for closure at all, the forces pouring through from other planes continued flowing, feeding upon themselves, creating a cascade effect that exceeded all calculations. What was meant to be a controlled strike, devastating but limited, became something closer to a force of nature, recognizing no boundaries, respecting no intentions, simply consuming whatever lay in its path. We cannot know with certainty what happened to the mages of power themselves in the immediate aftermath of their working. Some accounts suggest they survived the initial unleashing, protected by wards and defensive measures they had established. Other fragmentary references hint that at least some perished in the backlash, consumed by forces that proved stronger than their protections could withstand. The truth, like so many other details of this catastrophe, remains lost to history. What is beyond dispute is that the invoked devastation, once unleashed, began its terrible work. The energies that the mages of power had called forth, whatever their specific nature, spread across hundreds of miles of territory, transforming everything they touched. Cities that had stood for centuries disappeared in moments. Populations numbering in the millions died before they could comprehend what killed them. Fertile lands became barren wastes that would never recover. The Suel Imperium, in that moment, achieved its objective of destroying the Baklunish Empire as a military threat. The working proved devastatingly effective, more so even than its creators might have hoped. But effectiveness and wisdom are not the same thing. And the mages of power, in their desperation to save their civilization through ultimate magical force, had instead guaranteed its doom. For the Baklunish, those who survived would not accept annihilation without response. The ritual was complete. The devastation was unleashed, and the world would never be the same. The Suel celebrated their terrible victory, unaware that vengeance already gathered in the west, that the surviving Baklunish mystics prepared their own ultimate working, that what the mages of power had begun would end only when both empires lay in ruins, twin wastelands bearing eternal witness to the folly of unconstrained ambition. Section 5. The devastation unleashed upon Baklunish lands. The invoked devastation strikes the Baklunish Empire in the year 5094 of the Sulis calendar, -422 by Dale reckoning. What follows is destruction so complete, so thorough, that later scholars struggle to reconstruct even basic details of what occurred. The fertile heartlands of the Baklunish Empire, regions that supported millions of citizens, that contained their greatest cities and most productive agricultural lands, simply ceased to exist in any recognizable form. What remains in the aftermath is a wasteland that will come to be known as the Dry Steppes, a barren expanse, bearing almost no trace of the civilization it consumed. The capital city, located at the northern end of Lake Udrukankar near the ancient stone circles known as Taveg Baragu, vanishes so completely that later explorers find no ruins, no remnants, no evidence that millions once lived there. Only Taveg Baragu itself survives, the mysterious stone circles standing intact amid desolation, their white pillars unmarked and unweathered, as though the devastation that consumed everything around them simply flowed past without effect. How or why this one location survived when everything else was obliterated remains one of the great mysteries of the Cataclysm. You stand as witness to destruction operating on scales beyond normal comprehension. The exact mechanism of the devastation, the specific forces the Suel mages of power unleashed, remains unclear from fragmentary records that survived. What is certain is that whatever they invoked proved devastating beyond any previous act of warfare. Entire cities that had stood for centuries disappear, not reduced to ruins, but erased so thoroughly that later expeditions find no trace of their existence. Rivers that watered fertile plains vanish, their channels gone, their very beds transformed beyond recognition. The death toll defies accurate calculation. The heartlands of the Baklunish Empire supported populations numbering in the millions, concentrated in cities and towns, spread across agricultural regions, traveling trade routes that connected distant provinces. When the invoked devastation sweeps across these territories, the vast majority of these people die, though whether instantly or over hours or days, whether from specific magical effects or from environmental transformation that makes life impossible, the fragmentary records do not make clear. What survivors' accounts do tell us, passed down through generations and preserved in oral traditions that eventually found their way into written form, speaks of devastation that operated beyond normal physical laws. The land itself transforms, fertile soil becoming barren waste, water sources disappearing or becoming poisoned, the very air taking on qualities hostile to life. Some accounts mention strange colors in the sky, sounds that hurt the mind to hear, sensations of wrongness that transcended physical discomfort and touched something deeper, some fundamental violation of natural order. The transformation of the landscape proves permanent in ways that normal warfare, no matter how destructive, never achieves. Armies can burn cities, massacre populations, destroy infrastructure, but given time, people rebuild, life returns, nature recovers. The dry steppes created by the invoked devastation do not recover. Centuries after the cataclysm, the region remains barren, inhospitable, bearing permanent scars from forces that rewrote the fundamental nature of the land itself, rather than merely destroying what existed upon it. Those Baklunish citizens, far enough from the heartlands to survive the initial devastation, face horrors of a different kind. They watch from distance as the sky darkens over regions where their families live, where their cities stand, where their civilization's greatest achievements are concentrated. They see or sense wrongness spreading across territories they know intimately. Transformation occurring at speeds that preclude any warning or evacuation. And then, as the devastation passes, they venture cautiously into affected zones and find nothing. No survivors, no bodies, no ruins, just emptiness where millions once thrived. The refugee crisis that follows staggers comprehension. Millions of Baklunish citizens, those who lived in territories the devastation did not reach, find themselves homeless despite never fleeing their residences. Their empire, the political and social structure that governed their lives, has simply ceased to function. The capital is gone. The emperor and most of the imperial court are dead. The great cities that served as provincial centers no longer exist. The infrastructure that connected territories, the roads and way stations and communication networks, have been erased or rendered useless. These survivors stream westward, away from the devastated heartlands, seeking safety in regions the invoked devastation did not reach. They carry what little they could salvage, leaving behind homes and possessions, and often family members. The roads become choked with humanity in flight, desperate souls, seeking any destination that might offer survival. The western territories of what was the Baklunish Empire, regions that escaped the worst of the devastation, suddenly face influxes of refugees, numbering in the hundreds of thousands or millions, populations they lack any capacity to support. The makeshift camps that spring up become cities unto themselves, chaotic gatherings where tens of thousands huddle together with minimal shelter, inadequate food, contaminated water. Disease spreads through these crowded conditions: typhus, dysentery, plague, ailments that kill thousands more beyond those who died in the initial devastation. Sanitation becomes impossible. Arguments over scarce resources escalate into violence. The survivors, pushed beyond all endurance, sometimes turn on each other in desperate competition for survival. Local authorities in the unaffected western regions attempt to provide assistance, but find themselves overwhelmed by the magnitude of catastrophe. Provincial governors, who maintained order over territories of thousands, now face populations of hundreds of thousands flooding into their jurisdictions. Food supplies run out within days. Water sources become overtaxed. Appeals for help go out to neighboring lands, to neutral kingdoms, to any power that might show mercy. But the aid that trickles in proves wholly inadequate to needs measured in millions of displaced persons. The political structure of the Baklunish Empire, already weakened by decades of warfare, collapses entirely. The emperor is dead, along with most potential successors. The capital from which authority flowed no longer exists. The bureaucracy that administered the empire has been decimated. most officials having resided in cities that were destroyed. What remains are scattered provincial governors, each suddenly independent by default, each facing crises that exceed their capacity to manage, each forced to make desperate decisions with no higher authority to appeal to. The military, backbone of any empire, suffers devastating losses. Entire armies were stationed in regions that no longer exist, their soldiers and commanders dead along with the territories they defended. Surviving units, cut off from central command, must decide independently how to proceed. Some maintain discipline, providing what order they can in refugee camps and along migration routes. Others simply dissolve, soldiers deserting to seek their own families or to escape into anonymity. The proud military that once stood as equal to the Suel forces no longer functions as a coherent institution. The religious institutions face crises of faith unprecedented in their histories. Temples in the western regions that survived overflow, with faithful seeking answers, comfort, or reassurance that divine powers still care for their suffering, but the priests who might provide such comfort struggle with their own doubts. The gods failed to prevent the devastation. Millions of faithful died despite their prayers. The greatest civilization the Baklunish people ever built has been reduced to scattered refugees and barren wastelands. How can religious leaders explain such catastrophe? What meaning can they find in suffering on this scale? Among the survivors, the mystical practitioners who escaped the devastation begin gathering. These represent the most accomplished mages remaining to the Baklunish people. Individuals whose knowledge spans decades or lifetimes of study. Many were absent from the heartlands when the devastation struck, traveling on research missions, teaching in provincial academies, serving in distant outposts. Others survived through protective measures, wards that shielded them though they could not prevent the destruction of everything around them. These mystics congregate at various locations in the Western territories, drawn together by shared trauma and desperate need to understand what the Suel have done. They compare accounts, pooling observations from multiple perspectives, attempting to reconstruct the nature of the working that destroyed their civilization. What they piece together terrifies them. The Suel have invoked forces that should never be unleashed, that have torn reality itself, that have demonstrated both the awesome power and terrible danger of magic, pushed beyond all reasonable limits. But terror gives way gradually to something else. Rage. A fury beyond anything conventional warfare inspired. The Suel Imperium has not merely defeated the Baklunish Empire in battle. They have attempted to erase the Baklunish people from existence, to eliminate their civilization so thoroughly that future generations might doubt they ever existed. Such an act cannot go unanswered, must not be allowed to stand without response. The surviving mystics, though their numbers are far fewer than before the war, though their resources are a fraction of what the Empire once commanded, possess knowledge equal to or exceeding that of the Suel mages of power. They begin gathering at Taveg Baragu, the mysterious stone circles that survived the devastation intact. This ancient site, whose origins predate the Baklunish Empire itself, becomes sanctuary and fortress for those who will craft the response to the invoked devastation. The stone circles, apparently possessing properties that protected them from the Suel working, might provide similar protection for those who shelter within them. More importantly, the site resonates with power, energies that mystics can sense and potentially channel toward their own purposes. The Suel Imperium, having unleashed the invoked devastation, celebrates what appears to be decisive victory. The existential threat from the Baklunish Empire has been eliminated. Their enemy lies broken, scattered, incapable of mounting further military resistance. But celebration will prove premature. The Baklunish mystics gathering at Taveg Baragu do not accept annihilation. They prepare response, retaliation, vengeance that will demonstrate to the Suel that ultimate weapons invite ultimate consequences. The invoked devastation has reshaped the western reaches of Oerth, creating wastelands that will persist for millennia. But the Twin Cataclysms are not yet complete. One empire has fallen. Another will soon follow. Section 6. Immediate Aftermath and Baklunish Survival. The invoked devastation exhausts itself after days of continuous destruction, not because its creators designed any mechanism for cessation, but because the fundamental forces of reality gradually reassert themselves. The boundaries between planes, torn open by the Suel mages of power, slowly seal as cosmic order repairs the wounds inflicted upon it. What remains is silence, the terrible quiet of lands where millions lived, and where now only death and desolation hold dominion. The scale of loss defies comprehension. The Baklunish Empire, which governed tens of millions of souls across vast territories, has been reduced to a fraction of its former self. The heartlands, the most populous and productive regions, have been transformed into what will become known as the dry steppes. Barren wastelands, where almost nothing remains of the civilization that once thrived there. The death toll, impossible to calculate with precision amid such chaos, likely numbers in the millions. Perhaps as many as 4 to 6 million souls erased in the span of days. The survivors, those Baklunish citizens who lived in territories the devastation did not reach, number perhaps 3 to 4 million. These are scattered across the western reaches of what was the Empire, concentrated in regions that escaped the worst of the destruction. They are refugees in their own lands, citizens of a nation that no longer functions, believers whose faith has been tested beyond endurance by catastrophe that their gods either could not or would not prevent. The refugee columns that form in the aftermath stretch for miles, ragged processions of humanity carrying whatever they could salvage. You witness the full spectrum of suffering in these desperate migrations. The wounded lean on companions, their injuries poorly treated, many suffering from exposure to lingering magical contamination in zones near the devastated heartlands. Children cry for parents who will never answer. Parents carry young ones too small to walk, their faces carved with grief for other children they had to leave behind. The elderly, too frail to maintain the pace, sit by roadsides waiting for death, with expressions of resignation that would break even the hardest hearts. The makeshift camps that spring up in the western regions become desperate gatherings, where tens of thousands huddle with minimal shelter, inadequate food, and contaminated water. Disease spreads through these overcrowded conditions with terrible efficiency. Typhus, dysentery, and plague kill thousands more beyond those who died in the initial devastation. Sanitation becomes impossible when populations that previously numbered in hundreds suddenly swell to hundreds of thousands. Arguments over scarce resources escalate into violence as survivors, pushed beyond all endurance, sometimes turn on each other in competition for survival. Local authorities in the unaffected regions attempt to maintain order and provide assistance, but find themselves overwhelmed. Provincial governors who once administered territories of thousands now face populations of hundreds of thousands flooding into their jurisdictions. Food supplies intended to last seasons are consumed in days. Water sources become overtaxed and contaminated. Appeals for help go out to neighboring lands, to neutral kingdoms, to any power that might show mercy in face of such unprecedented catastrophe. Some aid trickles in, but nowhere near enough to address needs measured in millions of displaced persons. The political structure of the Baklunish Empire collapses entirely under the weight of catastrophe. The emperor and most of the imperial court perished in the devastation, along with the vast majority of potential successors. The capital, located near Taveg Baragu at the northern end of Lake Udrukankar, no longer exists. The bureaucracy that administered the empire has been decimated, most officials having resided in cities that were destroyed. What remains are scattered provincial governors, each suddenly independent by default, each facing crises that exceed their capacity to manage, each forced to make desperate decisions with no higher authority to provide guidance. The military suffers equally devastating losses. Entire armies stationed in the heartlands died, along with the territories they defended. Command structures dissolved when generals and officers perished. Surviving units, cut off from central authority and deprived of clear orders, must decide independently whether to maintain discipline or simply dissolve. Some formations remain intact initially, providing what order they can in refugee camps and along migration routes. But as days stretch into weeks with no pay, no supplies, and no clear purpose, desertions mount until few organized military forces remain. The religious institutions face crises of faith that shake them to their foundations. Temples in the western regions that survived overflow, with faithful seeking answers, comfort, or simply reassurance that the divine still cares for their suffering. But the priests and priestesses who might provide such comfort struggle with their own profound doubts. The gods failed to prevent the devastation. Millions of faithful died despite their prayers and devotions. How can religious leaders explain such catastrophe? What meaning can they offer in face of suffering on this scale? Yet amid the despair and chaos, something else begins to take form. Among the survivors, the mystical practitioners who escaped the devastation through distance or protective magic or sheer fortune begin gathering. These represent the most accomplished mages and clerics remaining to the Baklunish people. Individuals whose knowledge spans lifetimes of study and practice. They congregate at scattered locations initially, drawn together by shared trauma and desperate need to understand what the Suel have done. As they compare accounts and pool observations from multiple perspectives, a picture emerges of the magnitude of what the Suel mages of power accomplished. The Invoked Devastation was not merely powerful magic, but fundamental violation of cosmic order, a working that tore reality itself to unleash destruction beyond anything previously conceived. The technical achievement, from a purely magical perspective, represents an apex of arcane accomplishment. From a moral perspective, it represents depths of depravity that demand response. Among the gathering mystics, grief gives way gradually to rage. A fury beyond anything conventional warfare inspired, beyond anything normal human emotion encompasses. The Suel Imperium has not merely defeated the Baklunish Empire in battle. They have attempted to erase the Baklunish people from existence, to eliminate their civilization so completely that future generations might doubt they ever existed. Such an act cannot go unanswered, must not be allowed to stand without response, regardless of cost or consequence. The surviving Baklunish wizard clerics, perhaps 100 or more individuals of genuine power, begin gathering at Taveg Baragu. The ancient stone circles that survived the invoked devastation, completely intact. This mysterious site, whose origins predate the Baklunish Empire itself, and whose true purpose remains unknown even to those who study it, stands unmarked and unweathered amid the desolation. Its white pillars rising from barren ground, as though the devastation that consumed everything around it simply flowed past without effect. The mystics recognize that Taveg Baragu possesses properties that protected it from the Suel working, properties they might harness for their own purposes. The site resonates with power that trained practitioners can sense, energies that flow through and around the stone circles in patterns, suggesting connections to forces beyond normal reality. If the Suel could invoke devastation by tearing reality's fabric, perhaps the Baklunish could do likewise, channeling power through this ancient nexus to deliver retaliation matching the initial atrocity. Meanwhile, in the Suel Imperium, initial celebrations of victory begin giving way to growing unease. Reports of the devastation's success produced jubilation in cities that escaped the war's direct impact. The existential threat from the Baklunish Empire had been eliminated permanently. The Imperium stood supreme, its mastery of magic proven beyond question. The mages of power who conceived and executed the working were hailed as saviors who secured the Empire's future through their genius and courage. But as more detailed reports arrive from observers who ventured to the edges of devastated zones, the celebrations become muted. The scale of destruction exceeds even the most aggressive projections. The death toll, when estimates begin circulating among those with access to such information, causes even hardened military commanders to experience disquiet. The permanent damage to the land itself, entire regions transformed into wastelands that show no signs of recovery, begins troubling even those who initially supported the working without reservation. Among the Suel magical establishment, questions arise that have no comfortable answers. Did the devastation spread beyond intended boundaries because of miscalculation, or because such forces, once unleashed, cannot truly be controlled? If the latter, what prevents similar unpredictable effects from manifesting in Suel territories? The mystical contamination detected at distances thought safe, does it continue spreading, just more slowly than the initial wave? Will Suel lands eventually suffer consequences from the weapon they deployed against their enemy? More troubling still are intelligence reports concerning Baklunish survivors. The Empire was not completely destroyed. Millions escaped the devastation, and among those survivors are mystics of considerable power, practitioners whose knowledge rivals that of the Suel mages of power themselves. What might such individuals, driven by grief and rage beyond measure, be capable of doing? The Suel assumed that devastation of such magnitude would destroy all capacity for retaliation, but that assumption, made in war rooms while planning operations, proves dangerously optimistic when confronted with actual conditions in the aftermath. It is during this period of growing unease that a figure named Slaritin, remembered in later ages as the last high mage of the Suel Imperium, begins experiencing troubling visions. Slaritin is a seer, a practitioner whose gifts include glimpses of possible futures, though the visions come unbidden and often unclear in their meaning. What he sees in these premonitions fills him with dread, retaliation approaching, devastation answering devastation. The Suel Imperium consumed by forces matching what they unleashed upon the Baklunish. Whether Slaritin shares his visions with imperial authorities, whether he attempts to warn those in power of approaching doom, the fragmentary records do not make clear. What is certain is that he begins preparing for catastrophe, using his considerable magical abilities to create means of escape for at least some portion of the Suel people. He is not alone in sensing danger. Other seers and prophets, at least 7 according to later accounts, receive similar warnings, premonitions of fire falling from skies, of destruction that will consume the Imperium as thoroughly as the Invoked Devastation consumed the Baklunish heartlands. Some Suel, heeding these warnings, or simply continuing migrations that began during the war years, flee eastward across the Crystal Mist Mountains through the Kendine Pass, also called the Harsh Pass. Among those who depart is Keveli Mok, who will later found the Scarlet Brotherhood in the Tilvanot Peninsula. He gathers his most devoted students and flees before disaster strikes, joining earlier refugees who established footholds in the Flannies. The Baklunish mystics at Taveg Baragu, meanwhile, pool their knowledge and power toward a single purpose: retaliation that will demonstrate to the Suel that ultimate weapons invite ultimate consequences. They study the site's properties, attempting to understand how its ancient builders created such powerful protections, how they can harness similar forces for their own working. They draw upon their deepest knowledge, consulting texts that survived the devastation, invoking techniques that push the boundaries of what their mystical traditions consider acceptable. The preparation proceeds in secret, hidden within the protective circles of Taveg Baragu, shielded from Suel observation by the site's inherent properties, and by wards the mystics establish. The Suel, confident in their victory, do not anticipate that their devastated enemy retains capacity for response. This confidence will prove fatal. The balance stands ready to tip. One empire has been broken. Another will soon fall. The Twin Cataclysms, action and reaction, both equally devastating, approach completion, and the world of Oerth will bear scars from both for millennia to come. You have witnessed the first half of the Twin Cataclysms, the invoked devastation that reduced the mighty Baklunish Empire to scattered survivors and scorched wastelands. You have seen how desperation drove the Suel mages of power to unleash forces beyond mortal comprehension, how millions died as reality itself was torn asunder, and how the survivors, broken but not destroyed, gather at the ancient stone circles of Taveg Baragu to prepare their response. The Suel celebrate their terrible victory, unaware that seers among them receive visions of approaching doom, that the Baklunish wizard clerics who survived do not flee in defeat, but instead channel their rage toward retaliation. The invoked devastation has transformed the Baklunish heartlands into the dry steppes, permanent wasteland that will persist for ages. But the second cataclysm approaches with terrible inevitability, and when the rain of colorless fire falls upon the Suel Imperium, it will create the sea of dust and send the surviving Suelers fleeing eastward in desperate migrations that reshape the Flannies forever. In Part 2, you will witness the reign of colorless fire, the Baklunish response that matched horror with horror, genocide with genocide, erasing the Suel Imperium as completely as the Invoked Devastation destroyed their own lands, demonstrating that ultimate weapons guarantee mutual destruction. If you have enjoyed this deep exploration into one of the most catastrophic events in the history of the Flannies, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more journeys into the lore that shapes the world of Dungeons and Dragons.